Well, 2 weeks ago, we drilled some stuff. We got, very much into memorizing, because even if you want to take a more avant-garde, ecological approach to teaching something, where you let people explore and learn through exploration, there's always a background of basic information that has to essentially be memorized in order for someone to learn. And so a simple explanation of that would be that we had to learn how to speak a language. And then by memorizing how words are used, grammar, basic grammar, logic, we can then explore the world, but we have to have at least some kind of foundation. And we're not just operating, completely starting from scratch, reinventing the wheel. So there's two ways to learn a language. You can sit down and memorize how to conjugate a given verb. Like the infinitive verb estar, or to be in Spanish, and so estoy, está, estás, están, estamos, estuvo, estuví, right? You can just kind of go on and on forever, and you memorize a big long list of how to conjugate a verb: past, present, future tense, first, second, third person, single. In Sanskrit, they have a dual case, plural usage. You can do that, and that's how people learn. Usually, that's how they learn a new language. But the other favorite approach is that you just immerse yourself in the culture and you learn in a much more organic way. You just work with the language because you have no choice. People are speaking it all around you, and it's on TV or it's in the newspaper you're reading, and you just have no choice through that immersion to learn the language. But there's still memorization going on. And even if you're in that immersive environment, you still ask people, what does this word mean? What does this word mean? How do you say that? And people correct you. And so there is some mimicry, there is some memorization, which is required. And given the, you might take a problem-solving approach to chess, where you explore the game and try not to just study the moves of others. I don't believe there's any world-class players who did that, but you could take that approach. But somebody would still at some point have to show you, here's how you move the pieces, and here's what you call the pieces. And so there's a certain baseline of knowledge which is required to then be able to explore a topic more creatively. You got to show somebody that the surfboard is used to surf waves. They have to watch you surf on a wave. Otherwise, they're not just going to figure out to get on a board and surf a wave. Somebody has to show you a little bit, here's how you swim out. And so that creating of enough structure, enough initial memorized, mimicked knowledge so that you can then work creatively with it. Can you still close that door for me? Thank you. That line where, okay, we've given you enough of a language, we've taught you the alphabet, we've taught you the moves on the chess table, we've taught you some basic math formulas. And then now you can start to get creative with them. And we don't want to stifle your creativity by giving you too much structure, become a slave to the structure, which doesn't mimic real life. But we don't want to give you so little structure that you're left reinventing the wheel. That fine line is, what makes for a great coach, what makes for a great teacher, what makes for a really efficient learner, student. is knowing when to be chaste and when to memorize and when to be faithful and simple and when to repeat and when to explore and do things new and be creative and chart your own course. So we actually did an example of both. We did a really heavy-duty ABC class where I literally forced everybody to memorize stuff. And that works. What are the two Sanskrit words for the concepts that are taught in the second chapter of the Gita?
Yoga and Sankhya.
Said it wrong. What? Sankhya and yoga, that's right. And then what do those two terms become? What are they glossed as in the third chapter? Karma and Jnana. Get that door closed, please. Karma and Jnana. Good. And then what does that evolve into in the fourth chapter of the Gita? Anybody? Yeah?
Offering karma, doing your service of the idea.
No idea what you just said. Please don't speak if you don't know what you're saying. What happened in the fourth chapter? Anybody? Yes.
Krishna teaches the idea of doing yoga, so you feel attached.
That's in the third chapter, not the fourth chapter. Okay? Yes.
How to use the...
No. Yes.
We got Dravya Maya Yagna.
Boom. Dravya Maya Yagna versus?
Jnana Maya Yagna.
There it is. The sacrifice just of goods or the sacrifice done in knowledge. Excellent. And then because normally I taught that I introduced Yagna from the third chapter, you assumed it was in the third chapter still. But I broke this. I broke the normal protocol. See, I hadn't actually learned it. Because when I didn't give it to you in order, like when I go A, B, D, and then I ask you what to go in, you don't know that's C. You follow? Okay, and then in the fifth chapter, what did that become? 2 words. Sanskrit. Yes. Sannyasa and yoga. Yeah, you got to memorize that stuff. And more so when you're studying a piece of literature or something like that. There's just a certain lexicon, a certain glossary of terms you have to memorize. And without memorizing them, you're never going to get it. Then we broke from that model and we got radically creative last week. And we dealt with 2 super enigmatic verses from the Gita that just lend themselves very well to exploration. Lend themselves very well to creativity and exploring and interpreting and putting your own flourish on them. And the verses could either be applied to God or the soul. They have to do with the cause of suffering, essentially, which would normally be evil, but there's no concept of evil in the Indic tradition, the ancient Indic tradition, so you end up with sin and ignorance caused by one's nature, swabhav, and then you got to unpack what that means, and then you get a really interesting premise, which is that the soul is covered by ignorance, and if the soul's covered by ignorance, and ignorance is the worst thing that makes all the bad stuff in the world, what does that mean? The soul's covered by ignorance, and ignorance is what makes all the bad stuff in the world. What does that mean? The soul's not intrinsically ignorant, not intrinsically broken, not intrinsically faulty. Rather, it's merely covered by ignorance. That's right. Which is a radical idea. When you look at the religion of 5 billion people in the world, they don't believe that the soul is good. They believe the soul is corrupted. Adam and Eve messed up, and all their children forevermore are invested with immortal sin and have a fractured soul that can only be made right by Jesus or Muhammad. It's the religion of 99% of the Christians and the Muslims in the world, so you're looking at 5 billion people. So now we're caught up. That's what we did the last 2 weeks. And so now we're going to look in some detail at text 16. Jnanena tu tat ajnanam yesham nashitam atmanaha. Jnanena tu tat ajnanam yesham nashitam atmanaha. But by knowledge, that ignorance, but for one who has destroyed the ignorance of the self by that knowledge. Yesham, for one. Nashitam atmana, who's destroyed of the self, ajnanam, who's destroyed the ignorance of the self. But for one who's destroyed the ignorance of the self. How have they destroyed it? Huh? Jnanena, by knowledge. It's in the instrumental case. Jnanena, by knowledge. Jnanena. Jnanena means by knowledge. But for one who has destroyed the ignorance of the self by knowledge. Yesha means for one. Tesham. Yesham and Tesham, they go together. For one who does this, for that one that. So for the one who's taken the trouble to destroy the ignorance of the self by knowledge, for that person, Tesham, adityavat jnanam prakashayati tat padam. For that person, knowledge is like the sun, which illuminates that supreme. Knowledge is like the sun. Aditya means sun. Adityavat means like the sun. Adityavat jnanam, that knowledge is like the sun. Prakashayati, which will illuminate. Tat, that padam, that supreme. Now, padam, supreme, tat padam, that supreme, what does that refer to in this verse? The soul. Anybody have any other answers? Okay, the soul or the super soul. We use the word super soul, but I never heard the word super soul before I became a Hare Krishna. And so super soul, also over soul, supervisor, right? Somebody's a supervisor, they're above you and they're looking at you. Overseer, supervisor, the same idea, that you're above somebody and you're looking down on them. You follow? So in other words, super is used supersede. Kind of mean above and beyond. We use the word super like, that was super, good job, like Superman. But Superman also in some ways means like Uberman. You follow? It sounds cheesy in English because of the way that super is used colloquially to mean kind of like kitschy, great job, buddy, like super duper. It's a way we use the term super. But if you look etymologically or the way the word super is used, supersede, supervise, superimpose. What's going on? What is it? Huh? Was it a bug? I mean, come on, Madhuri, really? You gonna break the class because you can't look at the bug? Huh? It's a grasshopper. Grasshoppers can fly? Okay. All right. You want to leave the door open? Leave the door open for it. I don't think it's going to help, to be honest. Not that door. Leave this door open. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think they're attracted to the dark. I think they're attracted to the light. Anyway, this was totally not required. Supervise, supersede, superimpose, on top of, above. You follow? Super soul, over soul, Original soul. Is that the same thing?
Yeah.
All right. I guess you were justified. That was gnarly. It's like banging into the windows?
No, the ceiling.
Poor guy. Anyway. He'll get tired. Gnarly. All right. Stop focusing on that. It's hard not to, though, isn't it? All right. I'm going to perform the austerity of not focusing on it anymore. Just look at each other and not look up. Yeah, super soul. Uber soul, original soul, over soul, overlord. You follow? And so although the word super soul is a word I'd never learned before I became one of us, if you know the English language, which I didn't I didn't know the English language like I do now. And so I just, accepted the term, memorized it, and then used it, never really questioned it. But then I got older and I realized, oh wow, there's power behind that term. Oversoul's cool too, isn't it? It's cool, especially because we haven't heard it, and because over doesn't have that same kitschy feeling that super does. It's not overdone, right? But yeah, so tat padam, prakashayati, it will illuminate that supreme. Prakashayati is in the future tense. It will illuminate, it will reveal, it will manifest. What? Tat padam, that's supreme. And so that supreme, you say, means the soul, and you say means God, right? What's your evidence? Don't have any. What's your evidence?
Om Tat Sat, that.
Don't have any either. Why do you think it's one versus the other? Can't bring Om Tat Sat into this.
It's one of the same Tat.
Yes, the word that. The word Tat means that.
Because of
Hold on. So it's like in the beginning was the Word and the Word was God. That doesn't mean, in the beginning was Logos and Logos was Theos. It doesn't mean like that, every single time you hear any word in Greek that's in that sentence, it refers to that sentence. The word tut literally means that. Like etat, this, and tut, that. You follow? That's what the word means. Etat, tut, this and that. This is closer, either through time or space. This book. I want you to read this book? No. Read that book. This book, that book. You follow? Could I say, don't read this book, read that book? Could I say that? Wouldn't work, would it? Doesn't make any sense, does it? Don't read this book, read that book. Doesn't work, right? This and that. Spatially. One's close, one's far away. This time? No, that time. Time or space. Closeness, proximity, remoteness. So the word tut means that. The word tut is not the important word. Tat padam. Padam means great, supreme, highest. And so padam is the important word, not tut. You follow? Although tut is important. In this for this question, the word padam is the important word. So why do you say the word padam means God, and why do you say the word padam means the soul?
because we're talking about the ignorance that the soul deals with.
Yes, but you weren't here for class last week. Last week we had two verses. One used the word prabhu, and the other one used the word vibhu. And we were trying to interpret whether the verses referred to the soul or to God, and we realized, what did we realize? You don't remember?
That didn't matter.
It didn't matter, right? It could be either one, right? It's not that it didn't matter, but it actually does matter. But the verses were not definitive enough where it had to be one over the other. Both interpretations were reasonable, right? Yeah. You follow? So your evidence is it spoke about the soul being covered. Okay, but there's other things it says, the Prabhu doesn't create agency in this world. You follow? I mean, there's all sorts of like wild stuff that could definitely refer to God. So why did one of you pick, I mean, now he explained why he did, because we talked about the soul being covered. He assumed that's all that was spoken about because he wasn't in class. Why did you pick it was about God?
When I read it, the mention of the Supreme, like if we have this enlightenment that gives us knowledge of the Supreme, then something that we were completely unaware of before, which is that we're not alone. Like the Supreme, I think God.
I mean, you were onto something, and I think you lost it. Yeah, you saw that? I was with you, and then you fell apart. Here's why. No, you weren't grasping. You were grasping, and you hit upon pay dirt, and then you left it. Like if somebody picked up some gold while they were looking for gold in the river, and then threw it back in the river because they didn't realize it was gold. Like they were panning for gold, and they got some gold on their plate, and they went like that too fast, and like the gold fell out, and they didn't realize they had gold. So, supreme, which I'm assuming is related to the word super. I haven't looked up the etymology, but there might be a soup verbal root, and there's probably an R attached to it. But like SUPR or something like that is going to be the root, because that supreme, super, they have a similar usage, similar something. There's something similar in those two words. So it could be from su in Sanskrit, which means beautiful or good. Could very easily come from su in Sanskrit. Anyway, when you think of supreme, that means the highest. What's higher, the soul or God? God. Therefore, the ultimate supreme with a capital S would refer to God. The super soul could be used for us. We're also superior to our body. We're also a Prabhu in some ways. We're also Vibhu in some ways. The soul is also in many ways similar to God, but there are some ways in which God as a singularity is better than us. And when you talk about supreme, you're talking about the superlative. You have good, and you have better. Better is called the comparative in language. You follow? There's a comparative. Good, better, and best. Best is the superlative. Same word. The superlative. The best thing, the highest thing. So who's higher, the soul or God? God, and therefore the word supreme, padam, rigorously defined, must refer to God because it's the ultimate supreme thing. Contextually, if you find a section where it could only refer to the soul, that would be okay. Could also be referred to as padam. But if you've got the freedom, why wouldn't you want to say that param also meant God? If there's not something in the verse, if it said, and that param, that supreme, became influenced by Maya, could that refer to God? No. You got confused, hidden. That supreme became influenced by Maya. Does God ever become influenced by Maya? The answer is no. Therefore, if we were to say, and the supreme became influenced by Maya, that could only refer to the individual soul. It couldn't refer to God. You follow? But if there is nothing like that, then when you see param going big and saying it's the soul, why not? It's God, why not? Did you follow that? That's your justification. So you would say, because it used the word supreme and that means the highest, I realize that God is above the soul, and therefore I thought I would use God as a singularity. Does that make sense? Is that a better argument than yours?
Yeah, I think so.
It's not. Your argument is just fine. The preceding verse talked about getting covered, and that was referring to the soul. Prabhupada's translation we're not going to worry about. And so the soul being covered, again, this verse is just like the other verses. You can refer to God or the soul and it works fine. And really, well, what does knowledge illuminate? The self or God? Who said both? Yeah, obviously it's an artificial dichotomy. Knowledge is ultimately going to illuminate both the soul as well as God. It just depends on what level of knowledge. The highest knowledge will reveal the deity. And as a precursor knowledge, maybe the soul is revealed. Right? So we don't, because these verses are open enough to interpretation that we're allowed to see it as both, we should not say it's got to be one or the other. We should be thinking, could it be both? You should always look for that inclusivity and then allow that inclusivity to get ruled out by context, by things in the verse. Does that make sense? So your starting point should always be, it could be both. And then the only point at which you determine it can't be both is when it becomes impossible for it to be both because something in the verse mandates against it. And you actually thought you found that. The soul is covered by ignorance. The supreme got covered by Maya, and therefore it couldn't be about God. You follow? So your thought process was good, but you weren't here last week, so you didn't know what the two verses were. So you didn't know that there were elements that could only refer to the soul, and then elements which also could refer to God in those and actually which favored being interpreted as being for God. So some of the verse was more favorable towards God, some of the verse was more favorable towards the soul, and so it left you in it could actually be both. And so this verse also could be both. Your general mindset when looking at something deep and profound, any piece of significant knowledge, is you don't want to pigeonhole it and narrow-mindedly glom onto it. It's called anchoring bias, where you get your first piece of information and then you become convinced that that's the truth, also called first impression bias. And then all further information that you receive has this impossible hill to climb. I use this all the time. This never-ending moving of the goalpost. That you want me to prove something just beyond a reasonable doubt. But that when I inspect your evidence for your belief, it's shoddy. There's not a ton of evidence to support your belief. But because your belief is your belief, you never question its bona fides. But now I introduce some new piece of information, and you could make me climb Mount Everest. And then you maybe begrudgingly, for a moment, we'll just go silent. Can't even admit it, you just go silent. And then go home and stupefy yourself. You understand? You go home and just make yourself dumb again to forget the fact that you were humiliated with knowledge which went against the knowledge you first had that you anchored yourself to for no good reason. Do you guys follow this? Anchoring bias is real. It's a problem. You read one paper on something, you're like, oh yeah, I'm a master of the subject. And some other paper comes out and you're like, oh, it wasn't convincing. But when you actually look at the evidence in the second paper, it might be way better than the information in the first paper, but you've got this massive filter on now because of anchoring bias. They gave a bunch of generals. They told them, they gave them information which indicated that attacking was the right way to go in a war game situation. And then they started giving them evidence that demonstrated that attacking and losing troops was the wrong way to go. But once those generals had committed to a course of action based on purposefully misleading information that was given for the first piece of information, then it took them 7-8 steps of having evidence which disproved their first action. Because in the war game, they're sending thousands of soldiers to their deaths and how to retreat, pivot, strong. Nobody wants to do that. Other generals who weren't given that first piece of information that made them make the wrong decision, were just the second piece of information or the third piece was enough to get them to make the right choice. That confirmation bias. You start to filter out what you don't want to be true because you're anchored to this point that you think is the truth just because you read it first. You have to fight against that tendency. The tendency already exists. It has survival value. We have to be decisive. We have to make decisions. We don't always have a lot of time to make decisions. So you snap, you make decisions, and you run with it. Sometimes making a bad decision, but running with it has a higher survival probability, creates more survivability. You pick the wrong way to attack, but if you just keep attacking, you win, even though you went with the wrong attack. Like if you play that, like a video game, like what was that game? No, it's that game like where you like Street Fighter, it's an old video game, Street Fighter. Sometimes you just have like an attack, just hit the button, you just keep hitting the button, like kick. It's half the time you win. You can't figure out the other attack. You just like end up hitting the same attack again. The precursor to Street Fighter was a game called Kung Fu. You had like a front kick and like a jumping kick, a couple of moves like that. And so sometimes you just find a guy who would just do the same move over and over and over again. Jump kick, jump kick, jump kick, jump kick, jump kick. It's just over and over again. And sometimes it works. You can only get to a certain level. You can only beat a certain boss with that kind of a very remedial approach to something. But it does get you somewhere. And so you recognize a pattern, you make a decision, and you just go with it. So there's some survival value, but we're meant to do more than survive. And a lot of times what we need to do is curb that nature to think more broadly about a subject. So you should always be thinking in the broadest terms possible about a given verse, and then allow the context of the verse to narrow your opinion of what it means organically. Did you guys follow that? That was a gem. It's like that was some gold. Don't throw it away. Keep it. It's a valuable tool to use. Again, jnanena tutat ajnanam yesham nashitam atmanaha. But for one who has destroyed the ignorance of the self with knowledge, tesham aditya jnanam. That knowledge is like the sun. Prakasha yati. It will illuminate. Tat padam. That's supreme. It'll illuminate the soul. It'll illuminate God. Jiva Goswami says, when you first tell somebody about Krishna, you tell them about the soul. Just like if someone's in a dark room and they've never seen light, you poke a little hole in the dark room and a ray of light comes in the room and they go, what's that? And you go, that's God. That's the sun, excuse me. Sorry. That's the sun. But the ray of light isn't the sun, it's just some photons. But for someone who's in darkness, that ray of light is the sun. And then eventually they get out of that darkness and they can see the sun and they can understand the ray of light and everything. So we first start with self-realization. The soul is an amazing concept. Like I was just talking, I met somebody on Wednesday. I was just talking to him. Today he called me up. I gave him my number, so he called me up today. And he's from LA. And he said to me, because I believe all religions are one and ultimately the supreme is unnamed, unseen, unknown. And so, there's just all different manifestations of that one supreme, unknowable truth. So that's kind of like catnip for me. That's like, I have a strong kind of natural reflex to someone saying that. But I said to them, I go, yeah, I get what you're saying. I appreciate that. Thank you. Because I made a judgment call that at his level, that realization was a great realization to have. And that tied us together and created a bond. And that was enough. We could work with that. And later on, we could modify that. We can adjust that later on. But I didn't have to do it right from the beginning. I felt like that was a good place for us to find common ground on. And so the soul, revealing the soul, and that is the supreme, that's a great realization. There's nothing wrong with that. And to see it as, that means it's illuminating God, you can eventually see God. That's another great realization, a more advanced realization, a higher realization. And the best of all is to be able to understand that it's good for that one and that one, and that the verse is actually supportive for both. Do you guys follow that? When, however, one is enlightened with the knowledge by which nescience is destroyed, then his knowledge reveals everything, as the sun lights up everything in the daytime. Well, everything, of course, would include both. Right? Everything would include both. That's great. Good. All right. And that's, this verse is deep. First of all, metaphors are fantastic. Like when they teach kids how to play tennis, and they teach kids, turn your wrist this many degrees, turn your elbow this many degrees, turn your shoulder this many degrees. That actually doesn't work as well. That's an information system approach, where you essentially try to program somebody like you might program a computer. That doesn't work because life isn't like that. Human beings don't learn like that. And then especially in difficult situations, they won't be fluid. Because how you hit a tennis ball, for instance, you never hit a tennis ball the same way twice. Like I said, when Bernstein figured out, he was, this is post-World War I in Russia, he was trying to figure out why some blacksmiths always cut the sheet metal and hit the exact right spot with the hammer and other blacksmiths didn't. And he set about trying to master the perfect stroke, the perfect arc. But when you measure people with cyclography, where you attached a bunch of lights to their body, like with CGI technology, when they're trying to figure out how to make a CGI thing move like a human. Is that the thing?
No, it's a bee.
Okay. He saw that the master blacksmith never did the same stroke twice. What would happen is he would start his movement and he would adjust the movement on the fly so by the time he got there, he got the result he wanted. You're really looking for a result. Like in jiu-jitsu, you're looking to get your opponent's leg in between your legs to put them back into half guard, for instance. It's really it's a simple meditation. How do I get this person's leg in between my legs? The technique that you learn is never the way the technique works in real life. And there's all this extra stuff that happens in real life when you try to apply the technique that you learned, and the technique doesn't work because there's all this extra stuff. That extra stuff is making the technique work. The technique is not it's some cues, but the reality is you need to have a task-oriented focus where you know what the result is, because then you can start to mold yourself and adjust on the fly in real time the way the blacksmith, the arc of his hammer goes, the way an expert tennis player can play tennis. Hit with their backhand, hit between their legs, hit strong, hit soft, hit with the edge of the racket, hit right in the middle. It doesn't matter. He can hit anywhere because he's fluid. So when they want to teach tennis players really well how to teach with this ecological approach, they'll tell them, hit the ball so it goes like a rainbow. So like your arc is like making the ball go like a rainbow does. You follow? Those kind of cues, those kind of meditations are really powerful because they're not so deterministic that you're trying to force a square peg into a round hole. When your heart rate is exactly perfect and invariable, you know what that means? It means you're about to die. When you're healthy, your heartbeat is variable. It doesn't beat perfectly like a metronome. By the time your heart rate gets like a metronome, you're about to have a heart attack. Human beings aren't made to just conform. There's a fluidity in movement because there's always environmental factors. And so when you're focused on the task and what you want to accomplish, you can then morph yourself around whatever the environmental factors are to succeed in whatever task you want to accomplish. Therapy is the same way. You jump into therapy, you have a general sense of what you want to achieve. If you're a newbie to therapy, then you don't have a general sense of what you want to achieve. You have a script that you follow, and when the person doesn't fit the script, you don't know what to do. But if you're good at therapy, you have a general idea. And then as you engage with the person, you just figure it out on the fly with them. How to adjust, how to pivot, how to push, how to pull. You follow? Like, what's sweeping somebody? Well, sweeping somebody is off-balancing somebody. How do you off-balance them? Well, you make 3 to 4 points of contact with them, with your arms and legs. What do you do once you have those 3 to 4 points of contact? Well, you push and pull in various directions to off-balance them. You follow? It's like what's actually happening is a little different. It's not that there's just you grab here, you grab here, you grab. It's not how it works in real life. There's a lot more fluidity to the world. Does that make sense? So sometimes getting a simile or an analogy is incredibly useful because it conforms to our experience of the world and we can understand something in a deep way. Think about the beauty of viewing spiritual knowledge as being sun-like. Spiritual knowledge is sun-like. It's like the sun. Wisdom, right? Spiritual knowledge doesn't really do it. You need the right word in English, right? Wisdom. Wisdom is sun-like. That's what adityavat means, literally translated. It's sun-like. Wisdom is sun-like. And it illuminates everything around you. What does that make you think of? This is not a rhetorical question. I'm going to ask you to answer. So go on the journey with me. What does it make you think of when you think wisdom is sun-like and illuminates everything? How does that make you feel? What thoughts does that inspire? What's your reaction to that analogy, that simile, which is being used to convey truth in a different way, in a useful way? Just like hitting like a rainbow is a useful. You follow? It's a useful meditation, right? They tested guys' golf swings, expert golf swings. They're all different. Top level pros, they don't all swing the same way. Because your movement arms are different. You got different sized legs and a different sized torso and different length arms, different impingements and limitations on your movement patterns, and so everybody's going to be different. But like that blacksmith, you want to be able to hit the ball. So the real thing is, how do you get to there and make all the adjustments on the way there? You guys following this? Wisdom is like the sun. It's sun-like, illuminating everything. What does that make you think of? Go. Not you, keep talking too much. Yes. Not literally talking too much, but I don't want the entire class to be you because you're the only student in the room who's qualified or capable of opening his mouth. So you're good, but I want to encourage other people. I'm slightly disturbed that you always have to be the one to speak. But let's see. Go ahead. I'm slightly disturbed that no one else will speak. I'm disturbed at them. I'm good with you. In case I'm not disturbed that you have to be the one to speak, like Mr. Speaker. I'm disturbed all of them for not raising their hands. You follow? But I will call on you if these knuckleheads can't get their act together. Yes?
That makes me think of the warmth and being embraced by God.
Right? It's warm, right? The sun is warm. You're a feeling of being embraced by the sun, right? Embraced by God. It's a very positive emotional reaction to a verse like this, right? It's friendly. The verse becomes your friend. It's comforting. Excellent. I feel that way too. Excellent. Dom.
Takes me to a visual place when you're inside on a nice day and you can actually see the rays of light when they're coming in into like all the dust particles floating around.
Okay, so you're visually receiving the information and you're remembering being in a nice house that's bright and you can see the sunlight coming in and the dust particles floating in the air going up and down, and there's a sense in which the sun is this incredibly it's almost like a microscope, it's like almost like a natural microscope in the world that magnifies everything and really reveals what's actually going on. Excellent. Nice. Good. There's no wrong answers here, by the way. Yes.
My reaction was less poetic. It was just, you said,
Well, you're less poetic. You're semi-robotic. That's why we always joke, like download empathy programming. That's why you always send me emojis of robots when you make a gaffe. So you have a more, I don't know what the word is. It's not robotic. Is a little bit like almost facetiously and comically reductionistic. You have a very logical way of looking at the world, and a very straightforward way of looking at the world, and always a very clean way of looking at the world. And it's a little less muddy than most people. It also lacks a little bit of the, let's say, humanity, which is muddiness. But anyway, go ahead. Yes.
so when you said that wisdom eliminates everything I just thought I really need to get that, and it's something that I can, in fact, get.
You were inspired that this is something I want and can get. It's within reach. So there was a positive reaction, I want this, and there was hope, I can get this. Comfort, hope, and fond memories. Yeah. More. Yeah. I'll get all you guys, yeah.
The imagery in the verse reminds me of revelation, the moment when you finally get that one missing piece of salt.
Yeah, it's an epiphany, it's revelatory, it's epiphanic. Everything comes together. It's magic. There's a magical moment. Even great thinkers talk about this when they make an important mathematical discovery, an important science discovery. It just all comes together. They wake up. And they're like, wait a second. And it all becomes clear to them, right? And there's that feature of being human, where sometimes you have to step away from something and all of a sudden it all comes together, right? Excellent. That's great. That's nice. Epiphanic, revelatory, comforting, hope-inspiring, desirable. It's all good stuff. Juanita.
Yeah, it gives me hope that I don't have to stay in darkness, and that knowledge or that light I can bring with me everywhere I go.
Excellent too, right? Having a flashlight, so useful. You take it with you. Imagine having a sun in your pocket. You like break out the sun. How cool would that be, right? Go a sun in your pocket, not a flashlight, but an actual sun. Like he's like, whoop, and it's like goes in the sky, like illuminates. It's like midnight somewhere. You're like, oh, this is kind of like rough. I don't know where I am. You're just like, well, throw the sun up in the sky. Wisdom's like that. Goes with you. Changes the world you live in. It's actually, that's actually true. That's why we're grateful to our teachers and our tradition. Because it is like that. It's like having a sun in your pocket. What is that? Whose phone?
An alarm inside the kitchen.
And tell them to be quiet out back too. Excellent, Juanita. Can I?
It's wisdom equals safety and comfort, because if you're ever out in like legitimate darkness, it's a scary place to be, especially if you're not in four walls, like outside in nature. It's a scary place to be. You feel vulnerable. And so having that, she said it. It's like having, or you guys said it. It's like having the sun in your pocket.
There's a safety element because the world's a fearful place. one of the kids on my son's wrestling team, 14-year-old boy, tragically ended his life last night. Got bullied a bit, came into wrestling to not get bullied. Was friends with my kids. They never bullied him. Had nice interactions with him. But he tragically ended his life yesterday. Everybody's spun. And of course, you know, I mean, if your kid dies, that's it. Like, your life just irrevocably changed forever. There's your entire life up until the day your kid died, and then there's your entire life after your kid died. And it's just you live in a different universe. And my whole family was shook by it. And of course, I feel empathy and compassion and sadness, you know, like genuine sadness. I've been sad about it all day, even though I didn't know the kid, because I can imagine what it would be like for his parents and how they must feel. And so I've been thinking about it all day. But I'm not confused. I'm not bewildered. And as I talk to some of the people who reached out to me about it, I wasn't trying to fix anybody, but I naturally have wisdom to share, and even with my kids. And the wisdom of our tradition is tangible. It's real. It's practical. It improves your life. You can navigate infinitely better. Help others to navigate. You see things more clearly. It gives you enough detachment where the world is less able to break you. It makes you more resilient. It makes you a better learner. There's safety in it. The world's a dangerous place. You said something, people that use your own imagery. You're outside, no four walls in the dark, and so use your own imagery. And so the idea of safety, it's different a little bit than comfort. Comfort is kind of warmth. Safety is, protective, right? There's a protective aspect of safety. It's not necessarily there in comfort. It's maybe presupposed. It would be impossible to feel comfort and not feel safe, right? But you could feel safe without necessarily feeling comforted. They're two different things. Safety, I would interpret as more, freedom from harm, protected from harm. Comfort has a little bit more of a warm and fuzzy feeling to it. And so I'm sure that the words are synonyms, but synonyms doesn't mean they have exactly the same meaning. Good. Excellent. More. Yeah.
I feel reassured because, God is always there. Using the sun analogy, the sun is always there. So when it's dark like now, we're just on the other side. And that, so it's almost like...
You know the sun will always show up. It's never going to abandon you. Even when it's dark, you know the sun's just around the corner. It's an excellent point, different than anything else anybody has said. So even though we've got the same theme of hope or safety or comfort, it's you guys are doing what the Gita does. You're each using your own imagery and your own analogies to convey what aspect of the sun you're thinking about. That even when it's the middle of the night, if I could just make it. Right, like if it's freezing cold. Have you ever been camping? And it's freezing cold out? Who's ever been camping in the freezing cold? And like you were cold the whole night? Raise your hand if you were cold the whole night. Yeah, I remember being in the Boy Scouts, and I wanted to get like the camping merit badge. So one of the things you have to do is you have to go and sleep outside at night by yourself with no sleeping bag. You have to just go out. And for whatever reason, I picked like an awful cold night to do it on. So it was like 35 degrees out or something like that. I had to dig a little ditch and like cover myself with leaves, and it just sucked so bad. It was so miserable, like sleeping in like a little ditch, like covered with leaves, trying to keep my act together, It's just like awful. And I could hear, because the dads, their whole thing was they would just get drunk. So, right, if you like you would go like camping, and like all the kids would be like doing all the like Boy Scout stuff, and the dads would be there like helping you like lash two logs together, which is like a way of tying things together with rope when you don't have nails and stuff like that, and building stuff and whatever. But then at night they would just get drunk and rowdy, and it would sound like some kind of like a block party, and they would be up late. They would be up to like 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and just making noise. And like being a dad, you were in like it was almost like they were like a superior species or something like that. They were allowed to do stuff we could not do at all. We were like in a little military unit, and they were completely free, you know? If you join the military and you get your head shaved, you're wearing a uniform, and like a guy from the CIA shows up, he's got like long hair and a scruffy beard, he's smoking weed while you're like marching and doing drills, but somehow he's above you and tells you what to do. So I could hear the dad. I was so like pissed, thinking this just sucks. I just like could see their fires going. But I remember telling myself, all right, man, it's just like I had a watch. But I was like, look, it can't be that much longer, you know. Like it can only be so many like more hours. I didn't sleep the whole night. Just sat there shivering, like thinking I was getting hypothermic or something. Crawled back into camp looking like a raccoon or something like that. But I remember comforting myself that this isn't going to last forever. The sun's going to come up. Weirdly, when the sun first comes up, it's the coldest time of the day. You guys ever notice that? Because the earth has been cooling off the whole night. And then even though the sun's come up, it hasn't hit that critical mass where it warms the earth more than the earth is losing. And so there's that little moment there when the sun first comes up and you're camping and you're like, it's colder now than when it was nighttime, right? And then it clicks over. Excellent. Varangi.
Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I was thinking.
I mean, I just told you a Boy Scout story, like from what was like 40 years ago. I didn't think it did make sense, but I leaned into his story hard. Like I dove into his story. So anyway, go ahead.
So I was thinking that this has two elements that are really important, which is the wisdom part of it. Either you learn it, it's like real-life information of your own, or you get it from somebody else. But then also the sun shining is like that mercy that you don't have control over, but if you make your effort and you put some skin in the game, the sun's shining forever.
I mean, you're extrapolating tremendously, but I don't think anything you said was wrong. And the verse is broad enough and obtuse enough where it lends itself to that interpretation. So you can discover wisdom through trial and error. And I think there's a limit to how much wisdom you can discover that way. And then there's revelatory wisdom, which is given to you from somebody else. And they help you, give you a leg up. Of course, that revelatory wisdom you still have to imbibe. So it's A versus AB. You follow? Because the revelatory wisdom still has to be imbibed, so you still have some work to do. And it's still synergistic. And then God's mercy is like the sun, kind of independent of you, helping you out. That's you creating your own fire. And then the sun is something that you don't even do. It just bathes you in its light, right? That's really nice. It's good. I see you. That's the most ambitious. You really kind of ran with it. But there's nothing in the verse that indicates you made a mistake. The verse is particularly broad. And we all have a rich understanding of the sun. And by likening Krishna to the sun or the time, classic things that you find God likened to in religious traditions, there's just this, it opens up all these doors for you to take your own life experience and analogously merge the ineffable singularity that is God, that is the soul, with things in this world that are particularly inspirational, particularly powerful, and there's great fruit that comes out of that. Even Krishna's eyes are the sun and the moon. What a beautiful meditation. So you ran with it, but nothing you did was poor. The only thing I wanted to add was that, in fact, revelatory information still also requires you to imbibe it. And just because somebody gave it to you doesn't mean you still don't have responsibility to work with it. More. Shri, redeem yourself.
I like this verse because it makes me feel small in comparison to the sun, and I also, the warmth feeling also comes through.
Yeah, right? There's the sun sometimes you see the earth and then the sun. It's like the size of the planets is so different. You ever seen those pictures? Like the earth's like this big and the sun's like this big on the screen and the earth is like this. It's like a little dot versus like taking up the whole screen. It's ridiculous, right? And so somehow being small usually makes you feel insecure, but somehow being small makes you feel cared for. Almost like a child who's small, but then their parent can just pick them up and carry them somewhere. If you're a child and you're small, your parents just carry you around. It's like, imagine if there was like a giant. Like imagine if you lived in a giant's palace with 100-foot ceilings. And there was a giant who was like 50 feet tall. And he would just come in, and like if you had any problem, he would just like pick you up and like hold you and like protect you from the world and like run you wherever you need to go like 10 times faster than you could run and just like take care of everything for you. Your smallness would somehow be merged with this feeling of incredible security. And so it's an interesting combo. But the sun analogy works for that. Excellent. More. KR.
When I think about being a human living without the sun, like living underground or something, I could probably survive, but the sun helps me thrive, and it's the source of life, it's everything.
What a weird direction to go in. Super cool. You know, when I meditate on living underground, I'm like, it's like, whoa, dude.
I'm an IT nerd, so.
When I imagine living in a bunker a mile underneath the Earth's surface, I'm like, I've never thought about that. Right? I mean, photosynthesis. I mean, the specialness of our planet, the magic of our planet is that we're in relationship to a sun, far enough away that we don't burn up, close enough that photosynthesis occurs and a proper atmosphere forms. And so there's a world without the sun would be horrific. In fact, people get depressed. People get depressed. When you live in a place where it gets dark, for a few months, 24 hours of darkness, people get depressed. They have to get light therapy. Excellent. More? Did you speak yet? Go.
It gives me a sense of curiosity, just wondering what I can see if I have more spiritual knowledge.
Yet something nobody said. It creates curiosity, inspiration, excitement. Much like Madhuri's desirability of it, but there's a like a curiosity and almost like a joyful, curious actually is the right word. It's almost playful and secure and safe, so you can explore in a safe way, right? And it's exciting. But not exciting like I'm jumping off a cliff and I hope my parachute opens. More exciting like this is something fun I can play with. Like I got a new magnifying glass. I can like make fires and do cool stuff. I didn't realize like, wow, this is amazing. You ever do that? Magnifying glass?
Oh yeah.
Go out and start a fire? Super cool. You ever do that? No. I think it's a guy thing. Okay, more?
Yeah, I was thinking, even in like a devotee's life, it's people talk about their life before wisdom and then after the wisdom, and it's like growth doesn't actually happen until that sunlight is present.
Yeah, at a certain point you cross a line of demarcation. You become more of an intermediate devotee and less of a beginner devotee. and your life becomes fundamentally changed for the better, such that you can't unsee things, or at least you think you can't because you never fell down. And so people do fall away. And then sometimes people come back and they're like, oh, I fell away, but I never really fell away. I still always remembered Krishna in my heart. And you're like, yeah, well, maybe. But there are people who fall away and they're gone forever. If they were gone forever, we wouldn't see them. So we wouldn't get the reports that they're gone forever because they wouldn't care to talk to us. And so we should, free will is always in the game. And so for a devotee who chooses to turn towards Krishna, then what you've said is true. They'll never forget. And even you go through some tough days, some difficult times, you won't forget. But if you turn away from Krishna and you don't want to hear that voice, and you willfully in your heart think, I don't want this anymore, then you tie Krishna's hands and he's got to let you go. And people can dip out for good. It's funny, we like to think there's no loss or diminution. I mean, Krishna says that in the Gita. There's no loss or diminution. You don't lose anything. And that's true unless you become really offensive and really unappreciative and really bite the hand that feeds you. And then you'll go and you'll never come back. There's a statement in one of our sacred texts that says, if you make an offense, even at the stage of bhav, kind of love of God, if you make an offense, your bhav will be destroyed, or it will become a semblance of bhav, love, or it will become a lesser love. Like somebody who's going to become a gopi ends up becoming a cowherd boy or a servant. And it's a bizarre statement when we think about the nature of the soul's love for Krishna. But we don't want to make spiritual offenses. Do you follow? We don't want to bite the hand that feeds us. And so you want both. You want that there's that before and after, and that's a really nice extrapolation on what I said about the tragedy of the kid losing his life. That's a really nice way to apply it to what we're studying. I think it's really good. But it also has to be tempered with some fear. Prabhupada one time said, my disciples aren't afraid enough of Maya. And so especially as sadhakas, we should be worried about losing what we have. We should be like greedy people who discover the hidden treasure and just sit around looking at their treasure all day and thinking how they're going to protect it. We want to be like that about our bhakti, where we're nourishing it, protecting it, caring for it, like a plant. We don't want to neglect it. You follow? Dom.
The sun doesn't discriminate, it's open to everyone.
What a nice one, right? Rain, clouds, sun. These metaphors for devotees traditionally have that interpretation. The rain rains on everything, the sun shines on everyone. And so, or if the sun shines, even if the clouds block, the sun's not actually blocked, it's just you're blocked by the clouds. And or step into the light. Matamasa jyotirgamayat, not towards the darkness. Go to the sun, from the Upanishads. That we need to step into the sunlight, but it's always there for us. Never discriminates, never prejudiced against us, never biased against us. That gives great comfort to devotees, and it's part of a proper conception of divinity. Excellent, really good point. More, yeah.
The sun also elements everything, no matter how it seems to us as they go. It seems pleasant or unpleasant.
Yeah, right, like the sun purifies urine is often given in the scriptures. Urine is a nasty thing, but the sun will dry it up completely and make it disappear. And so the sun has this prophylactic, which means purifying, by the way. It doesn't just mean contraception. It has this prophylactic quality that it purifies everything it comes in contact with, irrespective. Sometimes, they say one way to clean cloth is to put it out in the sun. And if people do that, they'll put their carpets out in the sun or whatever. It kills all microbes. If you have bed bugs, you put your stuff out in the sun for X amount of time, and it cooks it out, kills it. The sun has this incredible ability to just, even stool. You see stool like out in the desert, and it's just like, it becomes like just dust, and eventually just goes away. It's just gone. It's like incredible. And if you see a withered, like little piece of stool that's withered by years of being in the sun or whatever, it's probably just months, it's not as offensive. It's not as nasty. Right? Excellent point. Excellent point. And also very traditional. Dalen.
For me, it just makes me see the beauty, or makes me think about the relief of answers.
Yeah. For me, that statement, like, it almost sounded like you were discounting what every single other person who'd shared had said. I know it wasn't your intention, but somehow you've got that affect. You've got that way of doing where it comes off as condescending. It's like, oh, for all you guys, you said, but for me, let me tell you what it's really about. For me, here's what I saw. So you should probably dial that back, buddy. No, you should just be more careful. You got to train yourself to be more cultured and considerate. And it takes work. It takes work. You're young. It takes work. But you want to really, you're smart, but you got to work at it. You follow? All right. Now, as far as the content of what you said, I got lost. Oh, yeah, right? Wisdom you value because you used to be confused and it sucked. And you'd think you knew things, but you didn't. And you'd think you knew it today, and then the next day you'd be bewildered. You didn't know it, and then you think you know it again, and you don't know it. And you're jumping back and forth on this bipolar merry-go-round of trying to figure out the truth. And now you found a legitimate tradition, a deep tradition, a profound tradition with serious elders. And it's just, man, like I got answers. The sun came out. I'm not groping around in the darkness trying to figure out what I'm touching. Like, oh, that was wet. Yuck. Like, that's the worst thing in the world. When like you're in the dark and you're like groping around, you like touch something wet, and you're like, ugh. Like, it's just like it's like moist, and you're just like, oh, gee, I gotta get out of here. Like, right? Or like the blind men like touching the elephant, and they're like, oh, it's like a wall. The other one's like, oh, it's like a snake, a tree. And I say, no, it's a tree trunk. It's like the leg versus the body versus the snout. And so the sun comes out, and you actually know things. You can see it for what it is. And there's a certain gratitude and thankfulness, and like almost like relief is what I picked up from you. There's a relief that you feel that the sun gives, and the knowledge that the sun provides gives about the nature of the world, right? Excellent point. It's a really good point. Good point. Peyton.
When I think of knowledge being like the sun, I think that without it, I'm just asleep. And when the sun comes up or knowledge presents itself, it's time to wake up. It's time to open up.
It's a call to action. Sun's out. I got to get up. Got to get a move on the day. It's time to stop sleeping in the lap of the witch Maya. Right? That's like a famous statement in one of our songs. Ji jago, kota nija jao Maya pisha chira kole. You're sleeping in the lap of the witch Maya. And so you got to get up. The sun's out. The Lord's here. Good times have come. The sun's risen. It's like time to stop sleeping. Night's over. It's time to go about your business. You have things to do, a life to live. It's time to wake up. Wake up from ignorance. Wake up from wanton sensuality designed to obfuscate, all your pain and make it disappear temporarily and all the misery that causes. It's time to wake up to adult life, to spiritual life, to face your demons, to face your pain, to grow, right? Excellent. Good. Totally different than anybody else too. And you can see as everybody's talking, it's your stuff. It's your life and what you're going through and what you need. And so that's the universal metaphor of the sun combined with wisdom. It speaks to everybody. I mean, this was the most robust Q&A session I've ever done in my life. Why? Not because you guys are a particularly good audience, sorry. But I've had you guys on other days and you're not always the best. But maybe you brought your A game today, I don't know. But the Krishna's simile was great. And it was, you knew it. You know the sun. And so it gave rise to, you got to get creative with it. And like incredible, no one said the same thing. Everyone had a different flavor. It was super individual. And each point, without a single exception, was brilliant. Each point deserved a paper. You get some credit. Krishna also gets credit as an excellent teacher. And amazingly, the openness of the verse is our friend on a day like today. You can play with it. You can have fun with it. You're not limited. There are limitations. We're talking about the sun, not the moon. But those limitations are such that they foster creativity. Get this person's leg in between your legs. You follow? Off balance them by pushing and pulling with 3 to 4 points of contact. It's enough structure to make you creative, but not so much as to oppress creativity and make it too robotic. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you very much.